Hey everyone, I am here in Tokyo, Japan with Black Pigeon Speaks. How's it going?
It goes well, Lauren. It goes well. How are you?
And for those of you who don't know who he is, I apologize you don't get to see his face because working in this industry, if you have any other sort of job or if you just don't want to be attacked, quite frankly, showing your face is not that great of an idea.
I'm not a fan of getting urine poured on me.
Yeah.
That's more your thing.
Damn it. But we wanted to talk today, I specifically wanted to talk about culture.
Okay.
And I have this theory, seeing all of the natural disasters, in fact, we're in a typhoon right now.
Right.
But in the States, seeing all these natural disasters, everything happening, everyone is looking to the government and blaming the government first and foremost, saying, why aren't you helping these people? Why aren't you coming in and aiding them? If it were a community, the first thing you would do is you would go and you would knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, let's get together, let's get some food, let's protect ourselves, let's work to build this together. But if you have mass immigration, you knock on your neighbor's door and they're a Muslim and you've got your hair down, you're going to have some trouble there. You knock on the door, they don't speak English, you're going to have some trouble there. So I have this theory that government wants more immigration to make people more reliant on them rather than on their community. And I really want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I'd have to agree with you, and I think it's a very cogent point. The thing about government is it exists to grow. If you look at all of the Western governments I can think of, whether we're talking Europe or their colonial appendages, being Canada, the United States, Australia, from, let's say, the turn of the last century, the 19th to the 20th century, if you look at that 100-year time span, people went from no income tax, very little low tax, but very low services. You had probably the military, the post office, and a couple of other offices that were necessary. And there you go, you can have them. And I think what it is the government wants to grow itself organically. And the number of employees, the power that it has over people, it's just growing exponentially. And the government does these sorts of things because, like you said, they want more power. And if you look at all of it, for example, the more that government gives people, let's say, for example, welfare benefits, prior to systematic welfare benefits in Western societies, women would have to be a lot more careful with who they married. They'd have to be a lot more vetting with whom that they would have a child with, because if they weren't sure of who that man was, being a single mother prior to the 1960s was a passport to poverty. And with every new layer of government that government is given to its citizenry, it enslaves them, quite frankly, ever a little bit more.
And you're seeing this in Europe. It's the destruction of all of these social structures that were set up before to ensure a good life, like the family. If something bad happens to you, you go to your mother, your father, and they help you out. You go to your brother, your sister, your children, anyone. If anything bad happens to you in a really cohesive community, you go to your community to help you out. In fact, one of your friends was telling us a really cool story. I don't know if you could tell it for us.
Okay. The story is, my friend's name's Joe, and he was telling us this story about the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints, that they had such a large distrust for the government. So the idea was, when Brigham Young, I think, he's not the first, but he was the one that brought the Mormons to Utah. He built his own schools. They had their own currency. They had all kinds of just community-based systems. And when the U.S. government found out about this, they sent in, I think he said 5,000 men to say, you're going to stop this now or we're going to kill you all. But the thing is since that time, the people in Utah and the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints, have a very, very large distrust for the government. And because of that, if somebody loses their job, for example, the story goes that there was a man and he said, I've lost my job, and his wife was crying, well, I don't know what we're going to do. And they went outside and they found $1,600 in their glove compartment in their car. And, they came back into the church where they were saying, thank you, Jesus, for helping us. Thank you, God. He's blessed us with $1,600. We're going to be able to pay our rent. But the idea was that the Latter-day Saints have such a large distrust for government. They have such a strong community that if somebody loses their job, they don't want any member of that community to have to go to the government for help. So they take care of their own community. They're insular to a point where they help one another in their day-to-day problems that communities and individuals have.
And that can only happen if there's trust and social cohesion in a community.
Yep.
And I believe we were also talking earlier about a study that has been done when there is more immigration, without the assimilation, of course, at the current rates there are in Europe, current rates in Canada, America. When that happens, there is higher distrust in communities. And I believe, was it a Canadian that did that study?
I believe there's several. I think the most prominent one, though, is by a man, Professor Putnam. I think his first name is Robert, out of Harvard University.
Harvard, right.
And but there's been dozens of studies. I've seen studies on community cohesion and even running computer simulations. You know, whether you do it through computer simulations or you do it on the ground, fact checking and stats. The more immigration from dissimilar societies and the lack of assimilation, which is the foundation of multiculturalism, you have less community cohesion, you have less trust, you also have less altruism. An interesting study I read was one on Florida. So in Florida, people who move to Florida, you've got different groups, but one of them is retired older people. In the United States, that group tends to be white. And the communities and the young people in a lot of the communities in Florida tend to be people of color. And what has been shown is that the more diverse a society becomes, people don't even want to put tax money investments for things like schools. So whenever there's a referendum on let's raise the taxes for property taxes by 1% so we can build a new gymnasium at the local school, they always get voted down. And the idea is that even altruism for things, this is why, for example, in communities, and it gets back to your idea about government, that if there isn't a solid community that can help with things like charity, because all charity prior to the 1960s was based around, most of it was based around the church.
Right.
And I think in that study with Putnam, he showed everything from lower trust, lower just tension, just negativity. But because he's not dead, he's a liberal professor, he sat on his findings, I believe, for almost a year, trying to find a spin for them. And he couldn't. And so he's been lambasted by leftists and his detractors as fueling the hate. He's the fueler of the hate. So he came up with, his lament was that, now, of course, people hunker down in hyperdiverse societies. They don't even want to go and meet their neighbors at this point. But, possibly sometime in the future, we may see benefits, but we're not sure what those benefits are, but most possibly 10, 50, maybe 100 years down the road, it might be a great thing.
I've always said it's really not easy to be the first to say something, to be the trailblazer, because even if you'll be vindicated one day, it's usually once things have gone so to shit that it's irreversible. Yep. So it's an unfortunate cycle where this man will probably have to be vindicated by the destruction of civilizations like France.
Yep.
And
Sweden.
It really makes you think, though, how places like Canada can continue to say diversity is our strength when the studies, the reality is so different than that. And I really don't think 50 years from now, when they're speaking mostly Chinese in British Columbia, when you got growing Muslim populations in Quebec and Ontario, people are going to be asking, is multiculturalism that great? And if our government keeps saying diversity is our strength, that's not going to be a good enough answer for them. What do you think is going to come of that?
Well, I completely agree with you. Canada, being that we're both from Canada, and we can probably talk about it the best, you and I together. Canada, I just saw something. It was quite strange. It was Canada had its 150th anniversary of Confederation. I think it was 1867. And the interesting thing is that when Confederation was done, the process or the council or the kind of at a loss for words. Anyway, the process, the event of Confederation was in Prince Edward Island, and actually they didn't even join Confederation. So it was the joining of Ontario and the joining of Quebec, and I think it was Nova Scotia, and they held their conference in Prince Edward Island, but Prince Edward Island didn't join Canada's Confederation. I think it's a very telling bit of history, and that was 150 years ago. But
sorry, there are angry dogs in the background. I apologize, guys.
Sorry.
Okay. The dogs are less angry. We're back.
Okay, we're back.
They just hated hearing about immigration.
They were pretty angry about it. No, we were talking about Canada and what's going to happen to Canada. I think Canada will be, along with it, I've said this before, it's going to be similar to Sweden. It's going to be the canary in the coal mine for Western society. Because when you basically strip a people of their identity, which is what modern Canada has done. Canada had an identity. Its identity was rooted in Anglo-Saxon common law, the idea of freedom. It was a settler society, and it did have its own unique Western character. But today, like we were talking before, if you talk to your average Canadian, they'll say, what is Canada? And they'll just say, immigration, multiculturalism. And if you're a person of quote-unquote old stock Canadian families, you're told you have no culture.
Yeah.
And this inevitably can't lead to something good. And we can't, as a society, only be concerned with growing GDP per capita.
Yeah.
Because this doesn't build a society that anyone would really want to live in.
Right. Now, I think that the end result of a lot of this, like it has become in Europe, is things like the European Union, where the biggest people rejecting the European Union are places like Poland, are places like the Eastern European countries that are like, nope, we have our national identity. We want to make our own decisions. We have our own ideas of what our future is. And that is why a lot of this is happening, the destruction of the cultures, all this mass immigration where people are literally being imported. And where is that money coming from?
Right.
How are these people able to import migrants and just ship them all throughout Europe? The destruction in Canada, the destruction in America. If you get rid of people's identity, just make the government bigger and bigger and bigger. Why have borders? Why have countries? If Canada is just multiculturalism, as most Canadians describe it, why not just become a part of Egypt? If you don't have a language, culture, or borders, why even be Canada? So do you think we're going to have a bigger global government in these coming years?
I think that's what they want. But I have faith that people are even now beginning to push back. You gave the example of Poland. Another good example of that would be Hungary. Their president there, Viktor Orban, he is dead against the EU. He's against globalism. He's against the erasure of his culture and his society, and he's not ashamed to say it. So he might be the first one, but he's even said that he doesn't care if he's being called politically incorrect. He doesn't care because he says it is what's happening, for example, in the West right now. He said if we make a mistake, and that mistake he's talking about is the importation of millions of unassimilatable people from, unfortunately, countries that don't share a tradition of enlightenment and liberalism. A lot of them come from societies that are highly illiberal and bring with them a lot of very, let's just say, less than enlightened ideas about how to live your life or how to treat other people different from you. And he said if they make a mistake in Europe, that it will be disastrous and it will be something that can never be undone. So he would rather, if Europe, he's even said, I mean, the guy's a clown. He's even not, I don't mean a clown in that. It's almost like he's mocking Western Europe. He even said, we will accept refugees. We'll accept Frenchmen. We'll accept Dutchmen. We'll accept Swedes running from the chaos of multiculturalism and forced diversity. And this is the president of Hungary. So I do believe that there is pushback. I think people are getting tired and more tired of it. I mean, even getting back to Canada. Canada is even Stats Can, which is Statistics Canada, which is the ministry in Canada that oversees statistics of
research,
whatever.
And such, yes.
They even say Canada is breaking along ethnic lines. Like, for example, Vancouver, the city that we both come from, is breaking along ethnic lines. And these ethnic lines are not being enforced. They're being chosen to do.
I'm going to put up a map here of immigration to certain areas because there's an amazing article. I'll have to show you it after where they show immigration to certain areas and they color it. And there's one area that I grew up in that's all light blue. It's all Europeans that lived there. We moved there after our initial neighborhood became all Indian. It's insane. People are absolutely putting themselves into ethnic enclaves. And they call us a mosaic in Canada. America is supposed to be a mixing pot, although that's not really happening either. They're all supposed to become the same culture. Canada is a mosaic. We're supposed to be literally different sects of different cultures that don't talk to each other, don't engage with each other. In fact, some of them hate each other, so it's really not a great plan. My question is, what happens when one part of that mosaic becomes bigger than the others?
Well, what always happens in human history. That group then exerts its own collective interests. The problem is right now is the dominant group in Western society is Western people. But Western people, I've talked about this several times, Western people, through a process that's lasted hundreds of years, have been divested from the idea of having any group interests. And to have group interests is to somehow feel that you are enacting some kind of, for lack of a better word, evil. It's literally Hitler. Should this group of, let's say, Dutch people, they have group interests within their own country, especially if they might become minorities within that country. The same could be said for Swedes. I mean, we should be clear, though, too, that immigration in and of itself is not a bad thing. I mean, so long as it's a controlled thing and people are assimilating and joining a society rather than transforming it. A lot of people like to use the example of Native Indians in Canada and the United States, and they always say, well, you people, Canada deserves to be destroyed because you came in and stole the land from the natives. Yes and no. Human populations have been conquering one another since the Stone Age. Yeah. I mean, you don't go to Turkey today and say, you people need to give it back to the Greeks because, Anatolia used to be a Greek Christian. I mean, even if you look at all 7 churches of the apocalypse in the Bible are in Turkey. Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, was a Turk, but he wasn't a Turk. He was a Byzantine priest, right? A Greek-speaking Byzantine. But we don't tell the Turks to give back Turkey to the Greeks. In the same way that Canada was settled and built, it doesn't necessarily follow that because we settled and built a country, that it necessarily follows that we should be destroyed ourselves. So it's a lot of leapfrogging from one idea to another, but I think that inevitably, I think there's going to be a pushback.
Right.
Anyway.
You know what's funny? I see this kind of group preference thing that you were talking about, how there's a real aversion in Western individuals to have any sort of group interest. It's almost an intelligence thing, because a lot of them are saying, I don't care what race you are, I don't care what culture you are, if you're the best person for the job, I'm going to hire you.
Right.
Because that's the logical thing to do. However, when you're competing with tons of sects of that mosaic that don't play by that game and play by a different rule, and they say, I'm only going to hire Chinese people. I've gone to places in Vancouver where they won't serve me because I'm white. I'm sure there's enclaves like that all over the place.
Yeah, of course.
So if you're competing against people that are playing by an entirely different set of rules, well, Westerners aren't going to last very long if they aren't playing on a team and everyone else is.
That's the thing. It's like trying to play soccer, for example.
Yeah.
You've got a bunch of individuals who won't pass to each other and won't work together, and you've got another team, full of stars that are, passing back and forth and scoring and scoring and scoring. You're not going to win. So this is, I think we've talked about it before. Civilization is not an individual sport. Civilization is a team effort. And what's happening now in our society is what happens when people don't collectively act as a team and they only think of themselves. This is where, the radical individualist doesn't understand that over time this can't last, because that larger population you were talking about before, as it grows and as it gets bigger, it will just then assert its own collective interests, and they might not be to your liking. Well,
I'm going to wrap this up, since people have a low attention span and they don't watch videos past 10 minutes. But I'm going to let you finish off with one last comment. What kind of hope can you give people for Western civilization that are watching this?
Well, this is the thing. I get so many people telling me that I'm too black-pilled, or I drop too many red pills to, for them to even take it. But the thing is I see hope in the sense that people like even you and I are able to reach people. And even you reach so many different people, and it's creating awareness. And the thing is, and I think I don't know who I've heard this say, but Western people are very tolerant, they're very nice until they're not. And I think you can only push a people so far until they'll say, okay, this is not working out anymore. We need to work on creating a better society for us, our children, and our extended families. And I think that time is arriving. I think you and I talked earlier about the Overton window. the Overton window is shifting. Yeah. And ideas that might seem radical today are going to seem like common sense tomorrow. So I think there is definitely hope, and I don't think people should just roll over and take their cyanide pill. It's not going to be all black and doom and gloom. So take heart. Things are changing. People like Lauren are waking people up and making them aware. So you should support people like her because she's doing a good job at doing this.
I appreciate it. And of course, please do check out Black Pigeon Speaks channel in the description. He has some amazing content. And be sure to hit share on this video to let all your friends know what the heck is happening to our civilization, because that's important. Outreach and spreading the message. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time.
Bye-bye.